In the history of World War II, the names of George S. Patton, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Omar Bradley stand among the most famous American generals. But amidst these titans, the intrigue and combat romance are centered around a more unorthodox figure, Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen, Sr. To his soldiers in the famous 1st Infantry Division, he was their guy, a sloppy, furious, but absolutely devoted commander who despised army regulations and bureaucracy if they stood in the way of victory. To the German Wehrmacht, especially in North Africa, he was simply Terrible Terry, a source of night terror, a general whose division refused to play by the rules and forced Rommel's best tank commanders to fear the coming of darkness. Allen's story is a tale of determination, rebellion against the system, and an unorthodox genius who, despite his triumphs, was removed from command for being too effective and not disciplined enough by the standards of his more conservative superiors. The origins of a warrior, birth of a legend and first battles, legacy and failure, the rebellion against West Point. Terry Allen was literally born for a military career. Born on April 1, 1888, at Fort Douglas, Utah, he was the son of Colonel Samuel Allen, who served in the Army for 43 years, and Consuelo Conchita Alvarez de la Mesa, whose father was a colonel in the Spanish Army, who even fought for the North in the American Civil War. He was the embodiment of the American West, with a Latin fire in his blood. Despite this heritage, his path to becoming an officer was as thorny as his later career. The first rebellion against the system. In 1907, Allen entered the prestigious U.S. Military Academy at West Point. However, his passion for polo, gambling, and a, shall we say, dislike of academic discipline led him to fail his first year and be expelled. After managing to gain readmission, the story repeated itself. He failed his studies again. This was the first demonstration of his stubborn character. If he saw no sense in the rules, he simply ignored them. The backdoor route. Instead of giving up, Allen graduated from the Catholic University of America, and in 1912, through an officer's call-up exam, he earned the rank of second lieutenant in the cavalry. This circumvention, West Point was a club that often disdained exam graduates, permanently separated him from most of his peers but hardened his resolve. He proved that his fighting spirit was worth more than an academic diploma. Baptism by Fire 1, the Mexican Border, 1913 to 1917. Allen's early service was spent in the turbulent cavalry on the Mexican border, which became the perfect school for his aggressive nature. As part of the 14th Cavalry Regiment in Texas, he participated in endless skirmishes, chasing smugglers, shootouts with bandits, and maintaining order on the border. It was real, dirty, and unpredictable combat. In 1916, he joined General John J. Pershing's famous punitive expedition into Mexico against Pancho Villa. This experience taught him that the cavalry, and later the infantry, had to be fast, autonomous, and most importantly, aggressive. He learned to fight in conditions where, by the book, rules didn't work. The Great War and the making of a combatant. When the U.S. entered World War I, Allen was burning with desire to get to the Western Front. Having received the rank of captain, he insisted on a transfer from the supply train to the infantry. Heroism at San Miguel and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. As part of the 90th Infantry Division, Allen commanded a battalion. He was not a general commanding from a headquarters. He was an officer who lived on the front line. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the largest battle in American Army history, he demonstrated legendary resilience. The bullet that cured his stutter. In one engagement, he was wounded twice, in the arm and the jaw. The wounded Allen ripped off his tag to prevent them from giving him painkillers and returned to the fight until he lost consciousness. The bullet that pierced his jaw not only left a scar but, ironically, permanently cured him of the stutter that had plagued him since childhood. 0.2. From that moment, His voice became loud and confident. For his actions, he was awarded the Silver Star and the Purple Heart. By the end of the war, Allen was no longer just an officer. He was a hardened combatant with a legendary reputation. The interwar period, from polo to paperwork. After the war, Allen demonstrated his multifaceted talent. Polo and patin. He was a superb horseman, which led him to the 1920 Olympic Games in Antwerp as part of the U.S. polo team. It was in cavalry circles, where valor, aggression, and skill were valued, that he befriended another unorthodox genius, George S. Patton. They were united by a shared contempt for desk duty and a passion for battle. Marshall's prophecy. During the interwar period, as the American Army was shrinking and stagnating, Allen served in various training and staff positions. It was during this time that the future Army Chief of Staff, George C. Marshall, took notice of him. Marshall was a shrewd judge of character, and his assessment of Allen was brief but prophetic. Somewhere in his papers remained a note, qualified to command a division in wartime. Marshall saw in Allen a sloppy bully, but, much more importantly, a natural leader capable of winning. The first rule, aggression. The big red one, Marshall's promotion. With the start of World War II, Marshall began to shape his command staff, weeding out mediocre and conservative officers. He needed leaders ready for real, modern war. It was at this moment that Marshall, leapfrogging hundreds of more senior officers, unexpectedly promoted Allen to brigadier general. In 1942, Allen was appointed commander of the 1st Infantry Division, nicknamed the Big Red One, the oldest and one of the most distinguished units in U.S. Army history. This was an immense responsibility, but Allen was ready for it. Allen's philosophy. Victory is more important than order. Upon arriving at the 1st Division, Allen immediately began to implement his unique philosophy. He believed that Army parades and drill had little to do with real combat. His principle was simple. Victory is more important than order. Disdain for regulations. Allen openly permitted his soldiers to disregard showiness. They didn't have to be perfectly shaved. Their uniforms could be wrinkled and dirty. Their boots might be unpolished. If it was convenient for the fight, it was allowed. He didn't create a perfect serviceman, but forged a division that looked like bandits, but fought like a lethal force. War correspondent Ernie Pyle would later call Allen the real soldier's general. Lethally dangerous soldiers. Allen's goal was to create sloppy but lethally dangerous soldiers. He diverted energy from formal ceremonies and channeled it into aggressive, realistic combat training. The perfect balance with Roosevelt. As his deputy, Allen chose Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., the president's son. Like Allen, Roosevelt was an outsider due to his many civilian and political career breaks and was absolutely devoted to his soldiers and aggressive combat style. They formed the ideal tandem. Allen, the tactical aggressor, Roosevelt, the source of morale and inspiration. The intensity of training. The 1st Division's training in the UK was legendary. Allen demanded maximum realism. Training was conducted in conditions as close to combat as possible, using blank rounds and explosives to simulate real live fire. He deliberately subjected soldiers to the shock of battle, so they would overcome their fear before meeting the Wehrmacht. Night operations. From the very beginning, Allen emphasized night fighting. He believed that the American soldier, possessing inherent initiative, could dominate the more rigid German army in the chaos of darkness. This would become his signature tactic, later earning him the title, Terrible. Under his command, the 1st Division became not just a unit, but an aggressive, cohesive, and, most importantly, a fully combat-ready fist. Terry Allen was the embodiment of the American warrior, valued by his soldiers for placing their lives and victory above regulations. His legacy is not only the 2 divisions that became among the best on the Western Front, but also the eternal debate over what is more important, strict order or ruthless combat effectiveness. In the end, the Germans didn't fear perfectly pressed uniforms or parade marching. They feared Terrible Terry and his sloppy but lethally dangerous soldiers. North Africa, the birth of the nightmare, Operation Torch. In November 1942, the 1st Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Terry Allen, landed at Oran, Algeria, as part of Operation Torch, the first major American landing in Europe and Africa. The initial resistance was posed not by the Germans, but by the French Vichy forces. Faced with relatively weak but unexpected resistance, the 1st Division quickly captured the port. Allen, true to form, directed the operation with maximum aggression. However, the Americans soon faced a much more formidable foe. Axis troops transferred to Tunisia to reinforce Rommel's southern flank. It was here, in the cold and muddy Tunisian mountains, that the American army received a brutal lesson. Early battles were marked by initial mistakes, ineffective coordination, a lack of artillery support, and most importantly, a lack of combat experience in most American units. The Kasserine catastrophe and the lessons learned. The culmination of these early errors was the Battle of Kasserine Pass, February 1943. It was a catastrophe for the American army. Under Rommel's skillful leadership, the German Afrika Korps tanks easily broke through the inexperienced American defense lines, inflicting heavy casualties, including the capture of thousands of soldiers and the loss of hundreds of pieces of equipment. The 1st Division did not participate in the first, most crushing blow, but operated on the flank and in the subsequent counterattack. In this chaos, Allen proved to be one of the few generals who maintained his unit's combat capability and learned lessons from German aggression. We learned to fight on the battlefield. For the first time, they realized that the Nazi bastards weren't going to wait for us. They were going to kill us. Sex 0.3 were words roughly attributed to Allen after the defeat, in which he saw not only shame, but also a chance for hardening. It was after Kasserine that Allen doubled down on aggression and realism in combat, understanding that the only way to defeat the Wehrmacht was through superiority in initiative and speed. The Battle of El Guitar, confronting Rommel. The chance to prove their worth came in March 1943 at the Battle of El Guitar. This was one of the first major battles where American forces finally triumphed over the Wehrmacht. Allen was tasked with holding the El Guitar Valley. On March 23, 1943, the Desert Fox Rommel was dealt a painful blow, repelling the tank attack. The Germans launched a powerful tank attack, attempting to smash the 1st Division. Thanks to well-placed anti-tank artillery, and most importantly, Allen's unyielding will, the Big Red One did not falter. The attack was repelled, and the Wehrmacht suffered significant tank losses. The general's personal involvement. Legend has it that at a critical moment in the battle, when a German breakthrough seemed imminent, Allen and his staff, armed with rifles and submachine guns, personally defended their position, demonstrating that their general was ready to fight on par with the last infantryman. The night attacks, Allen's signature. It was in Tunisia that Allen finally formalized the tactic that would become his signature and the main reason for his nickname. Allen realized that the Germans, despite their mastery of organizing daytime blitzkriegs and defenses, were psychologically and tactically poorly adapted to night operations. They preferred to fight by the book and avoided chaos. We will fight where they can't see us. Allen ordered his units to conduct constant, aggressive night raids and patrols. American soldiers learned to move and attack in the dark. The goal: disorientation. These night attacks rarely led to major victories, but they had an immense psychological effect. The Germans, who were sleeping or resting, were constantly under attack. They couldn't consolidate, couldn't rest, and lived in a state of permanent stress, expecting the dirty Americans to emerge from the darkness at any moment. Serious tone. Why the Germans called him terrible. Terror in the dark. Allen's reputation among the Wehrmacht grew as the 1st Division perfected its tactics. The Germans gave him the nickname terrible, and it had nothing to do with his sloppy appearance. It reflected the fear of his methods. Psychological effect. German soldiers were trained to dominate in daylight and open terrain. Facing invisible, aggressive raids at night, when they couldn't use their superiority in heavy weaponry and communication, was disorienting. Quotes from diaries. Captured German documents and diaries, which American military personnel translated in North Africa and Sicily, often mentioned not American tanks or artillery, but the unstoppable night gangs of the 1st Division. German commanders anxiously noted that the Americans under Allen's command refused to fight honorably and turned the front into a zone of constant night terror. The Germans, who prided themselves on their professionalism, considered such a fighting style uncivilized and terrible. Ruthless effectiveness. Allen's philosophy dictated, "Speed and breakthrough are paramount." This stance led to some of his most controversial yet effective orders. Ignoring prisoners. Allen instructed his soldiers not to waste extra time or resources escorting or guarding large numbers of prisoners if it hindered the advance. This didn't mean prisoners should be shot, which would violate the Geneva Convention, but it meant that taking prisoners should not be the priority. In the context of a rapid advance, this forced Allen's soldiers to focus solely on destroying the combat-capable enemy and making a breakthrough, and make emphasis on speed. Allen often gave orders that shocked conservative staff officers. He encouraged ignoring the flanks and rear during an offensive if it allowed the unit to maintain speed and break the defense. He believed that a deep breakthrough into the enemy's rear would create more chaos and demoralization than a cautious clearing of every flank. This tactic was incredibly risky, but proved effective, especially in 1944 to 1945. The aura of the general combatant. Allen didn't just sit in headquarters and issue orders for night attacks. He personally reinforced his reputation. Frontline legends. Rumors circulated among the soldiers about a general who wore unpolished boots, might personally lead a night patrol, gambled with enlisted men, and used strong language that made even Red Army soldiers blush. He was the general combatant, embodying the fighting spirit. Comparison to Patton. If George Patton was a general who used armored aggression to paralyze the enemy, Allen was a general who used infantry aggression and night tactics to exhaust and demoralize him. Patton inspired awe. Allen inspired fear, because he was unpredictable and always too close. As a result, Allen's 1st Division became the most famous American infantry division in Africa, and then in Sicily. Triumph and shame. Sicily and the relief. Operation Husky. After the triumph in Tunisia, Allen and his Big Red One were assigned as the spearhead for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, July 1943. The division performed brilliantly, rapidly advancing deep into the island, displaying the same speed and aggression that led them to victory in Africa. However, as the advance succeeded, tensions with other commanders, especially Omar Bradley, increased. Conflict with Omar Bradley. The conflict between Allen and Bradley was inevitable. It was a clash of two army philosophies. Bradley, the man of order. Omar Bradley, commander of the 2nd Corps, which included the 1st Division, was the classic product of West Point. Strict, neat, valuing discipline, bureaucracy, and impeccable appearance. Allen, chaos and genius. Allen and his deputy Roosevelt represented chaos. Their division, stained with mud, with crumpled uniforms, and loose-looking soldiers who had just defeated the Wehrmacht, horrified the staff officers. The problem of insufficient discipline. Bradley constantly received complaints about insufficient discipline in the rear. 1st Division soldiers were known for overlooking minor rules, failing to salute, and sometimes arbitrarily requisitioning equipment or supplies. Allen and Roosevelt turned a blind eye, reasoning, if a soldier is winning, his unshaven chin is not our problem. For Bradley, this was unacceptable. In his view, sloppiness in the rear would sooner or later lead to sloppiness in combat. Removal from command. Despite the obvious combat successes, disciplinary problems became the deciding factor. August 1943. The tension peaked. After Patton was removed from command due to the soldier-slapping incident, Bradley secured the removal of Allen and Roosevelt from command of the 1st Infantry Division. Bradley stated that they had run their course and that the division needed a new, more disciplined commander. Clarence Hubner, a West Point, by-the-book officer, took the post. A shock to the Army. For the 1st Division, this was a shock and a betrayal. The soldiers idolized Allen. For many historians, this decision remains controversial. Bradley saved the American Army's reputation by restoring order, but at the same time, he deprived it of arguably its most aggressive and successful tactical infantry commander. Allen, the hero pictured on the cover of Time magazine in August 1943, was sent back to the U.S. in semi-disgrace. The second act, the Timberwolves of the 104th Division. A return, thanks to Marshall. Allen's removal from command of the Big Red One in August 1943 was taken as a personal insult. While his former soldiers prepared for the Normandy landings, Terry Allen, a hero of 2 wars, was sent back to the U.S., commanding only paper divisions. He was saved by his longtime patron, Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall. Marshall did not approve of Allen's sloppiness outside of battle, but he valued his main quality, the ability to win. He understood that breaking the Siegfried Line and fighting in the forests of Europe required not parade generals, but dogs of war. Appointment to the 104th Division. Marshall appointed Allen to command the 104th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Timberwolves. This unit consisted almost entirely of green recruits. It was the hardest assignment, to turn a green division into a lethal instrument, and to do it quickly while preparations were underway for the landing in Europe. Terrible Terry, the quintessence of the American warrior. Terry de la Mesa Allen was a general who won. His sloppiness, his stubbornness, and his combat genius were part of a character that made him precisely the leader his soldiers adored and the Wehrmacht feared. He was the antithesis of Army bureaucracy, living proof that victory requires not a perfect goose step, but ruthless aggression. Terry Allen will forever remain terrible, the general who, despite the system, won through his unyielding will and his art of waging war in the dark.